Hello, Rob Venn here. Today we're going to be looking at narrative structure. There are going to be three videos. This is the basic video. This will start with some very basic narrative structure theory. There will be a more intermediate one, which will have slightly more advanced theories, and there will be an advanced one, which will have more advanced theories in it. So, narrative structure. This diagram here shows what a basic narrative looks like if you plot it as a graph. At the very beginning, this is like the first act of our film, first 20-30 minutes probably. Here's exposition. Here we're setting up the story, we're setting up what is normal for our characters, what's the normal world they live in. Exposition, that explains things to the audience. Who are our heroes, who are our villains, where is this film set, when is it set, what are our character situations. Here we will get some event happen that disrupts our normality, causes an imbalance, a problem arises that needs to be solved. Roland Barthes called that an enigma. This is the inciting incident that kicks off our story. Most of the story is going to be this bit here. This is like the middle half of the film. So that's like the first quarter to a third. This is the middle half. Things are going to get increasingly more complicated, difficult, and worse for our protagonist or our hero. This is called rising action. So things get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until maybe, 3/4 of the way through our film. There'll be a climax. Things will get as bad as you think they could possibly get. It looks like our hero can't possibly win, but then the tide will change. Things will start to turn. This section of the film probably isn't that big, to be honest, but things will get better. Falling action. Our hero or heroine will succeed, they'll win, they'll resolve the enigma. And then here you get your denouement. Denouement means, tying up all the loose ends, wrapping up all your plot lines until your problem's solved and there's a new balance, a new normality that's been established. Our characters have evolved, they've changed, they've learned from their journey. So this is your typical kind of narrative structure. So, a couple of things to bear in mind with narrative. Narrative isn't just the story of a film. It's more complicated than that. It contains both the content of the story, but also the form that's used to tell the story. So it's not just what the story is, but how the story is told. So, two things to look at. Story and plot. So story refers to what happens in our narrative, in the story. What are the events that happen? So we've got certain questions we've got to ask ourselves, like, where is the story set? Now, the world which you create in your film is called diegesis. It has to be a convincing, believable world. It is a spatial diegesis and a temporal diegesis. Spatial obviously means place, space, where. So where is our film set? Temporal means time, so when is it set? So it has to have a coherent spatial and temporal diegesis. And it has to be convincing and believable. Not necessarily realistic, but at least convincing and believable. And the word we use for that is verisimilitude. So for example, if we're watching a science like Superman, we know that Superman can't fly. People without airplanes or helicopters or something can't fly. But as long as the special effects are convincing and believable, then we go along with it. That's what we mean by verisimilitude. So we have to ask ourselves, not just where is it set and when is it set, but what events start our stories? How do we set up normality at the beginning? And then what is the inciting incident that's going to drive our story forwards? What is the enigma? What is the problem that he's solving? Who are our characters? How do we introduce them? What conflicts do they have to face? What's at stake for them? What can they win? What can they lose? What happens to the characters as they face this conflict? So what steps do they go through? What hoops do they have to jump through? How do they learn? How do they face challenges? Do they fail? Do they succeed? What? Finally, at the end, what is the outcome of this conflict? How is the conflict resolved? Is the conflict resolved? It might not be. It doesn't have to be. But ultimately, what is the impact on the characters? How have they grown? How have they evolved? How have they changed? What have they learned? Plot, on the other hand, is not just what the story is, but how is it told? What's the form of the storytelling? What's the structure that it follows? So with plot, we have to consider how is the major conflict in the story set up? How and when does that happen? How and when are the characters introduced? The way in which you introduce the characters tells the audience a lot about them. Do we see them at work? Do we see them at home? Do we see them at leisure? Do we see them in peril? Do we introduce them as strong or weak? So how and when has the story moved along so the characters have to face the central conflict? How and when is the major conflict set up to propel the film to its conclusion? And how and when does the film resolve most of the major conflicts set up at the outset? So yes, similar to what we said about story, but it's not just what happens, but how are we going to show that? I mean, is our story going to be told in a linear fashion from beginning, middle to end? Does it have multiple viewpoints? Does it intercut between different viewpoints? Do we have a film like Memento or Irreversible that's told backwards? Is it told through multiple timelines, like something like The Godfather 2 or Inception? But if there's one thing a story has to have, it's got to have conflict. Conflict creates drama, and drama is what stories are all about. Ideal theory for this is Claude Levi-Strauss's theory of binary opposites. Comes from his 1964 book, The Raw and the Cooked. He was a structural linguist. He looked at how language and stories shape language. And he says that languages tend to deal with binary opposites, hence Raw and the Cooked. But think of what we mean by binary opposites. One thing or the other. Male, female. Good, evil. Right, wrong. Law and order, criminality. Hero, villain. These are the binary opposites. Simple binary opposites make films easier to follow. They are common in most stories. Not all stories, but most of them. This is an excellent theory, perfect one for analysing movies. Always look for a binary opposite. Another really common and popular theory when it comes to narrative is Zvetan Todorov's theory of equilibrium and disequilibrium. Bulgarian structural linguist like Claude Levi-Strauss, he looked at structural language and how they're shaped by stories and how stories are shaped by language. He says at the beginning of a film we have, remember that diagram at the beginning I showed you that had the exposition bit? Now he would have called that equilibrium. Equilibrium means balance. So at the beginning of a film, everything's balanced, everything is normal. Then there'll be some kind of disruption that causes a disequilibrium, an unbalance. That imbalance has to be recognized by someone. Usually our hero, or it might be a helper. They will then take action against that disruption in order to solve the problem, which at the end will result in a restoration of a new state of equilibrium. Things will never go back to the way they were in the beginning, though. Our characters will have evolved, they will have grown, they will have developed, they would have learned lessons. They're a better person for their experience. So it doesn't go back to the equilibrium. That's why I say new equilibrium. Excellent theory, that one. Very useful. On the subject of plot, of course, classic quote here from Jean-Luc Godard. A story should have a beginning and a middle and an end, but not necessarily in that order. So that's an excellent quote when you're thinking about narrative structure. That is some very basic narrative theory that will pretty much serve you for any film or story you're analysing. Here are some glossary terms to add to your glossary: denouement, plot, story, narrative, verisimilitude, temporal diegesis, spatial diegesis, equilibrium, binary opposites, and we can probably add verisimilitude to that as well. Right. If you've got any questions, you know where to find me. The next video is a more advanced one that will take you on to some more advanced terms. Talk to you next time.